So I'd like to proceed with welcoming our witnesses for the second panel. We have Dr. Lisa Kaida, Associate Professor with McMaster University. Welcome. We have Karen Kobussen, Chief Executive Officer of the Saskatoon West Business Association. Welcome as well. And then appearing on Zoom, we have Alina Morad, the Director of Federal Government Relations with the Refugee Center. Welcome as well. We will begin our round of opening remarks with Dr. Kaida.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration. My name is Lisa Kaida. I'm an Associate Professor of Sociology at McMaster University. As a sociologist and social demographer who has been studying the integration of immigrants and refugees for over 20 years, I'm honored to be here. In this opening statement, I will make 3 points based on my research on the secondary migration of refugees, in which I analyzed Statistics Canada's data on permanent residents. But first, it will be helpful to carefully distinguish between resettled refugees and asylum seekers. Resettled refugees are approved for admission before arriving in Canada and are granted permanent resident status upon arrival. In contrast, asylum seekers are initially temporary residents. If their asylum claims are accepted, they are approved as refugees and therefore become permanent residents. This process may take a few years. My past research focused on resettled refugees integration. I will now turn to my 3 points. First, the main takeaway from my research is that resettled refugees are more likely to leave their initial destinations than economic immigrants, mostly because resettled refugees are more likely to settle in smaller communities first. But more than 50% of resettled refugees do stay in their initial destinations, even if they are small, remote communities. Second, will this apply to asylum seekers? I cannot directly answer this question because asylum seekers' experience in smaller communities may be different from that of resettled refugees. Resettled refugees are mostly government-assisted refugees or privately sponsored refugees. Government-assisted refugees are assigned to designated communities upon arrival. Through the Resettlement Assistance Program, they receive income support for up to 12 months, as well as immediate resettlement services. Privately sponsored refugees are sponsored by groups of individuals or religious or ethnic organizations. Their sponsors are spread across Canada. They provide financial support, accommodation, and social support to privately sponsored refugees during their first year in Canada. Asylum seekers are not entitled to such social and economic support from the government or sponsors. Third, my research does not provide statistics on the secondary migration of asylum seekers. I defined the initial destinations of resettled refugees and other categories of immigrants as the places where they landed as permanent residents. If they move out of the initial destination later, that movement is treated as secondary migration. In my research, asylum seekers are successful in their applications and given permanent resident status, then their statistics are recorded as other refugees, along with other categories of refugees, such as those admitted on humanitarian and compassionate grounds. My research shows that more than 70% of other refugees initially settled in either Toronto or Montreal. But it is possible that asylum seekers arrived elsewhere first. When they became permanent residents, they might have moved to Toronto or Montreal. To precisely identify where asylum seekers initially settled, we will have to look at where they filed asylum claims or when their intended destinations or as recorded in Statistics Canada's data on non-permanent residents. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I look forward to your questions.
So much for your comments. We'll now move to Karen Kobussen from Saskatoon West Business Association. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members. My name is Karen Kobussen, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Saskatoon West Business Association. We represent and advocate for businesses on the west side of Saskatoon. We work to address issues that affect business owners, their customers, their employees, and those who live and work in the neighborhoods that surround them. These issues include business attraction and retention, community safety, housing, public services, and the overall health and vitality of the area. So I'm not here today as an immigration lawyer or a constitutional expert, but I am here as someone who works closely with local businesses and our community partners, including NGOs and CBOs, and I see the consequences of these federal policy decisions on the ground. So the motion before this committee is focused on efforts to relocate asylum seekers to other provinces. From the perspectives of Saskatoon, I would urge the committee not to mistake redistribution for a solution. Moving asylum seekers from central Canada to Saskatoon does not fix the broken system, and it simply just moves the pressure from one place to the other. We heard earlier that Saskatoon is overwhelmed, and that is true. I'm here today to support that. The real issue is that our asylum system is overwhelmed, backlogged, and no longer functioning in a timely or credible way. When claims take years to resolve, people remain in limbo, and that is unfair and creates uncertainty. During that time, they need housing, healthcare, schooling, income support, legal services, and other community resources. And these pressures are not carried by Ottawa or the federal government in any real day-to-day sense. They are carried by citizens, provinces, schools, hospitals, shelters, local organizations, serving agencies, businesses, and neighborhoods. Saskatoon is a generous city. We have welcomed newcomers for generations, my family included. Our businesses understand the importance of immigration. Many newcomers have started businesses, filled jobs, paid taxes, raised families, and made our community stronger. However, there's a vast difference between orderly immigration and an uncontrolled asylum backlog, and a major difference between welcoming people successfully and transferring this federal system onto communities that are already stretched thin. Saskatoon currently faces a serious housing crisis. We have residents who are struggling to find affordable places to live. We have less than 2% market rental vacancy rate, and that's just in Saskatoon. We have extraordinary homelessness, encampments. You heard earlier that we welcomed the displaced persons from northern wildfire season, and we have shelters and community organizations dealing with growing demand. We have employers who are concerned that their workers cannot find housing that they can afford. And just simply adding more people into that pressure cooker without first fixing the system will not help these asylum seekers, and it will not help Saskatoon. We know that healthcare and education are under strain. People cannot find family doctors. Exploding school classroom size, complex needs students, language barriers, you name it. Saskatchewan and Saskatoon are not in a position to increase this capacity right now. This matters. And for this reason, I believe this committee should focus on the root problem, that the system needs to be fixed. The solution is not to spread the consequences of failure across the country. The solution is to stop the failure.
1 minute.
Canada should continue to genuinely protect refugees who are seeking asylum for legitimate reasons. That is a very important responsibility. But we need to restore the basic principle that our immigration and asylum systems must be effectively and efficiently managed, and not through backlogs, loopholes, and unmanaged pressure. Relocating asylum seekers to Saskatoon is not compassion, it's downloading, because it asks communities to absorb consequences of a federal policy failure. Thank you very much.
Much for your remarks as well. I will now turn the floor over to Ms. Morad from the Refugee Center. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, members of the committee, for the opportunity to appear today. My name is Alina Morad, and I'm here on behalf of the Refugee Center, a nonprofit organization that supports refugee claimants through wraparound services, including legal support, employment assistance, language programs, and community integration services. Thank you to the committee for undertaking this study, as refugee claimants contribute significantly to Canadian society, and communities across Canada should be able to benefit from these contributions. The redistribution of asylum seekers in Canada is an inherently intersectional issue that requires an equally intersectional response. Any discussion surrounding redistribution must take into consideration not only where claimants are relocated, but whether those regions have the infrastructure, services, and opportunities necessary to support long-term retention, dignified work, and successful integration. The reality is that people naturally gravitate towards areas that have received sustained investment, where opportunities exist for them and their families, and where they can realistically build stable lives. If certain regions remain underpopulated, we must ask why that is the case and address those underlying conditions directly. It is crucial that any redistribution policies or programs remain voluntary and based on the informed consent of the claimant. Data from Statistics Canada demonstrates that interprovincial migration trends are heavily influenced by employment opportunities and affordability. Historically, people move toward regions where they are more likely to find stable work, better services, and stronger economic prospects. Refugee claimants are no different. Like anyone else, they're making decisions based on where they can support their families and establish long-term stability. This is why the central issue is not relocation itself, it's retention. In 2022, the Refugee Center launched a pilot program to respond to post-COVID labor shortages, which helped facilitate refugee claimant relocation to less populated areas in Canada. This pilot program operated until 2024 and has since been put on hold due to funding constraints. From our experience, in many smaller cities and regions outside major urban centers, the limited availability of education, employment opportunities, public transportation, and settlement services pose a significant barrier to successful integration. Without robust job opportunities, self-sufficiency becomes far more difficult, increasing reliance on already overstretched social and community services. This is not the goal of redistribution, nor is it beneficial for claimants, municipalities, or provinces. No job means no retention. At the Refugee Center, we see every day how access to employment support, language training, legal assistance, and community connection dramatically improves integration outcomes. However, I must highlight a major policy gap. Many non-governmental organizations that receive government settlement funding are currently unable to provide services to refugee claimants because funding eligibility is often restricted to permanent residents, accepted refugees, or government-assisted refugees. This places community organizations in extremely difficult positions, as you've heard today. Organizations are forced to scramble for precarious funding sources while continuing to respond to urgent needs on the ground. If Canada is interested in redistribution efforts, opening government funding streams to organizations serving refugee claimants should be one of the very first policy changes implemented. Doing so would strengthen the organizations already operating outside major cities and better equip them to support increasing numbers of claimants settling in those regions. It would also improve retention by ensuring claimants have access to the services necessary to successfully integrate into local communities. For this reason, we recommend increased investment in employment preparation programs, credential recognition support, and targeted labor market matching initiatives for refugee claimants. We also recommend the creation or expansion of a program modeled after the EMPP that would allow refugee claimants already in Canada to voluntarily participate in labor matching opportunities connected to regional economic needs. Such a program would assess a claimant's professional background, language capacity, family situation, and employment background, and connect them with communities experiencing labor shortages and prepared to support long-term integration. Claimants could then relocate with the assurance of stable and dignified employment. A program like this cannot operate in isolation. It would require federal coordinated calls for proposals engaging organizations across Canada and Quebec, with implementation anchored under the Economic and Social Development Canada. This would help ensure that redistribution is not simply about moving claimants across the country, but about creating more meaningful pathways to employment and long-term integration. It would require coordination between federal government, provinces, municipalities, employers, and community organizations, as well as investments in social infrastructure. Risk assessments could Risk assessments could be collaborative with local stakeholders to ensure that communities actually have the capacity to support newcomers sustainably and humanely. If redistribution is approached through investment and partnership, it can become a meaningful strategy.
We are out of time.
Thank
My
you.
apologies. Thank you for your comments, and I'm sure you can respond with further thoughts and questions. And with that, we will move to our first round of questions. And I believe we were starting with Mr. Redekop again.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing before us today. I'm going to start with Ms. Kobussen, my fellow Saskatoonian. You spoke about this study is about redistributing asylum claimants across the country versus dealing with the root of the problem. Could you speak a bit more about that and what is the root of the problem and how should that get fixed?
Yes, thank you for the question, through you, Ms. Chair. I think the root of the problem is, I don't think we're effectively measuring where these people already are, what their needs are. I get the sense that just simply redistributing people without taking into consideration, let's do an overlay of a municipality, for example, Saskatoon's capacity. What is your shelter capacity? How many people do you have there? How many people are you serving currently? How many refugees are there? When we don't measure, we can't manage. And what we don't measure becomes invisible and they just fall off the system. So I think that coordination that we heard earlier a little bit and that measurement piece really needs to be a coordinated effort between, especially the municipalities, because they're the ones that are taking the brunt of it.
So you represent businesses. If there was an influx of asylum seekers into Saskatoon, what sort of impacts would that have on the people on the businesses that you represent?
Well, Mr. Redekop, as you know, our Saskatoon West is probably one of a bit lower of a socio demographic area of the city, as you know. We have many, many immigrants, and a lot of them are business owners, came through on the Saskatchewan Immigrant Nomination Program and the entrepreneurial stream. They're looking for workers. They're looking to find stable housing for the people who they need. And so we have less than 2% vacancy rate in Saskatoon. And so I wouldn't want to see that sacrificed. These people are taxpayers, they're business owners, some of them are homeowners, but their employees need to be housed, they need to have doctors, they need to have schools. So let's allow them to have the means and access to that without overburdening a system that's already overburdened.
For Saskatoon services that, you talk about housing and there's other services like healthcare and things like that, is there a difference between orderly migration and, bringing in a whole lot of asylum seekers in a short period of time?
Yeah, definitely. I think, if we look back, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think if we look back, as to how the immigrant nominee program, the SINP program in Saskatchewan, has been extremely successful, where we had targets so we actually would allow people to come in based on those targets, and we sort of knew that was going to happen, and we could project whether it was healthcare, whether it was education, or whether it was housing. The other thing I think that is important about that is the a labor market growth, right? So we can also project who's coming in, who's opening businesses, how many employees do they need? And, Saskatchewan has one of the lowest employment rates of any province across the country. So it's really hard to find workers. So that needs to be orderly, managed, efficient, and effective.
You talked about processing claims faster than redistributing people around the country. You feel that's a better solution?
I think it gives certainty. Again, downloading is not compassionate. I definitely think the faster we can process claims, the more certainty it gives to the individual, so they understand their future. They know what they're going to be doing in 3, 6, 9, 12 months, whatever. And I think we owe it to those people to ensure that they have that certainty. Who wants to live like that? That's not very fair, nor is it compassionate.
So you would agree that if we have an asylum claimant who's failed, we need to process them and if they need to leave the country, they should leave the country rather than move them from wherever they are to a place like Saskatoon.
Definitely, enforcement is, what's the point? What's the point of having the rule if we're not going to enforce it? You know, and if the decision has been made for a reason to deny that claim, then yes, that individual or whoever we're speaking of, for whatever reason, they need to be returned. I think the due process is very important, but I also think that following the decision of that due process is equally as important.
So, again, in the scenario where we were to bring more asylum seekers to Saskatoon, what are the different pressures? Like, you talk about housing. Are there other things, homelessness, health? Like, what are the pressures that would come to bear, that would bear on the city?
Well, certainly, you know, we can look at cultural supports, depending on where the asylum seeker is, country of origin. We're not Toronto, we're not Montreal, we're not Vancouver. You know, we do have a diverse culture there, but maybe not diverse enough. So cultural supports, language supports, other public services, transportation. Saskatoon is a car city, right? You know this. You need to have a vehicle. Can they get that? Can they figure out how to get around? So yeah, housing is just the tip of the iceberg, but legal supports would be another one. Labor market, cultural, legal supports, language.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fragiscatos, je comprends que vous partagez avec Monsieur Duchesne.
And I understand you're going to share your time with Mr. Duchesne. At 3 minutes, because this was Mr. Duchesne's idea.
You spent your career studying international migration and the immigration system in Canada, as I understand it. Very simple question, but I think it's core to what we're looking at here. What does the general evidence suggest that you've looked at with respect to what makes for a successful response to asylum policy, successfully responding to those seeking asylum in a democracy like Canada? What allows for a country's response to be successful as opposed to the opposite?
My research never looked at asylum seekers specifically. I focused on resettled refugees, including government-assisted refugees and privately sponsored refugees. Based on my research, I cannot directly answer your question of what makes Canada's asylum-seeking policy successful.
I mean, this is your area of focus, is migration. What would be your point of view that you have put on record now in testimony, but can you share with us what you think are some of the key points? For example, Ms. Kobussen has touched on this in her testimony. We heard this earlier today. Ensuring that communities have resources, and if we're going to have individuals resettled in communities, that they go to communities with adequate resources, housing, legal services, settlement services, medical services be of a type that would be adequate, more than adequate, to ensure successful integration. Is this your view as well?
Yes, based on my research on resettled refugees' economic integration, to take government-assisted refugees, they are assigned to select number of cities, not only Toronto and Montreal, but also mid-sized cities like Hamilton or St. John's or Moncton and so forth. And what they receive is that for up to 12 months, they receive financial support, employment support, language support, and cultural support. Very institutionalized social and cultural support. To shift our eyes to privately sponsored refugees, then such support is given by local groups of individuals, or as well as co-national communities or cultural religious communities. So then whether it's government support or more individual support, those resettled refugees do receive sort of systematic support.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Deschênes now.
I'm just going to pause the clock here at 2 minutes, 30 seconds. And what I'll do, Mr. Deschênes, is just let you run into your next round. So with the will of the room, that'll be 8.5 minutes. Good? Okay.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci à mon collègue pour le temps.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank my colleague for sharing his time. First, a question for you, Ms. Kobussen. Can you hear me? In Saskatchewan and Saskatoon, there's a labor shortage, correct?
We have a low unemployment rate in our province, yes.
Et donc, vos membres à la Chambre de commerce.
So the members at the Chamber of Commerce have jobs that have to be filled?
Yes. So there are, I think that there are job openings. Many of them would be under the skilled labor. That I know we heard earlier that some of the asylum claimants would be skilled labor, and some of them service entry level jobs, things like that. So specific to the market, I couldn't tell you what sector, but yes, we have a low unemployment rate. So there are more jobs than people.
Il y a de l'emploi en Saskatchewan. Et,
So there are jobs in Saskatchewan, and you represent businesses looking for employees. So I was surprised to hear what you said, and that you and your members wouldn't be excited to potentially find some labor through the asylum seekers.
Immigrant-owned businesses. As I've mentioned earlier, our area of the Saskatoon is different socioeconomic demographic in that very immigrant heavy. Those businesses are culturally, they are, a lot of them bring their own people in. So I'll give you an example. And through the Saskatchewan Immigrant SINP program, the Immigrant Nominee Program, they will bring members of their own communities. So when we look to asylum seekers, that might be coming from persecuted regions or other places in the world. I don't know. What I'm saying is that we need to do an overlay of what services do we need for who and what supports. So I don't know that those cultures would be necessarily supported in Saskatoon because I don't know where they come from.
Vos membres ont besoin d'employés.
But your members need workers. There's a low unemployment rate, but they are hoping to hire people who come from a certain country and not others. In other words, they want to choose the ethnic origin of their workers.
I don't know what the okay, so I know what the unemployment rate is. I don't know what the labor market ask is, though. I do know that we have skilled labor positions that would be available in mining, in our resource sector. I do know that. I don't know about service. Most of the people that are in our organization are service businesses, restaurants, things like that.
Mais en fait, ma question, c'est, je vais vous donner mon exemple. Moi, dans
But let me give you an example. In Gaspésie, in eastern Quebec, there are several factories that are getting bigger and bigger, and it's hard to find temporary foreign workers. So what I asked is for people to offer jobs to asylum seekers. And so we worked on that pairing up, and we saw this as an opportunity to attract labor to the regions, because there are all sorts of people looking for jobs, but you don't see an opportunity there in terms of asylum seekers?
Well, definitely. I think that asylum seekers, given due process and given their right to work and be mobile, absolutely, they would be welcome.
une opportunité, s'il y avait davantage de demandeurs d'asile, là,
So if there were more asylum seekers, you think it would be a good way of filling job vacancies in Saskatoon?
Personally, I wouldn't limit it so narrowly to that. But I think if there were jobs, again, We're going to overlay all of the services, legal, technical, language barrier, skill set, etc. And if that works and all the stars align and everything triangulates, then absolutely, there would be asylum seekers welcome to come to Saskatoon and have work and support and legal assistance and everything.
Parce que si on faisait une répartition équitable,
But if we spread out the number of asylum seekers equitably throughout the country, then there would be more asylum seekers in Saskatoon. And if I understand what you're saying, there's a certain opening there.
I would say that as of April 1st, 2026, my understanding is that we have 1,113 asylum seekers currently in Saskatchewan. So I hope I'm right on that. That information was given to me. Of those, I don't know how many are working, and I don't know how many are there because they were relocated, and I don't know how many are there or who will stay afterwards once their cases are heard, etc. I think we need more information, and I think we need to make sure that it's not just about getting a job. It's finding a place to live. It's enrolling the children in school if they have children. Do you know what I mean?
What?
So I truly believe that we need to make sure we have all of the information available before we can offer that type of support.
merci Madame Kobussen. Madame
Thank you.
Kaida.
Thank you, Ms. Kobussen. Ms. Kaida, I'd like to talk about integration. If I understand correctly, you studied the issue of integration for refugees, not for asylum seekers. In your remarks, you said that in small communities, we were able to attract and keep refugees there. So how do you explain that phenomenon?
Government-assisted refugees and privately sponsored refugees, just to focus on government-assisted refugees, once they arrive in Canada, they are assigned to a select number of destinations, including places outside of Quebec or Ontario, which has where the resettlement agencies have been contracted by the government, the federal government, to provide employment support, language training, and cultural training for the government-assisted refugees. To shift our eyes to privately sponsored refugees, that kind of support has been provided by groups of ordinary Canadians, group of 5, as well as religious community, religious associations, cultural, ethnic associations that may be spread all over Canada, not just, again, Quebec and Montreal. Some of them might be in very rural area, including Northern Ontario towns or Northern Quebec towns. And over there, up to 12 months, those sponsors are required to provide financial support, accommodation, as well as so-called social, cultural support to privately sponsored refugees.
30 seconds.
Qu'est-ce qu'on observe comme taux de succès?
And what is the success rate like?
I used, as a measurement of success, I used employment rates and earnings on another research, which I didn't mention in my opening statement. Compared to government-assisted refugees, privately sponsored success of finding employment and earnings are higher than government-assisted refugees.
Thank you. We'll now move to our second round of questions, which are 5 minutes each, to Mr. Ho.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are first for Dr. Lisa Kaida. So your research has studied the short-term and long-term economic integration of refugees in Canada, and your work has compared privately sponsored refugees versus government-assisted refugees. Is that correct? Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit more about how the privately sponsored refugee program works?
So privately sponsored refugees are given permanent resident status upon arrival in Canada, and they are still approved as refugees by international organizations like UNHCR or other international organizations. So as well as it could be private responsible refugees could be family members or relatives of private or refugees who are already in Canada as well. And then they arrive in Canada, and then they are sponsored, taken care of by the sponsors, who could be either a group of individuals or ethnic organizations, cultural organizations, for up to 12 months.
So, and has the research found that privately sponsored refugees show stronger employment and earnings outcomes and economic contribution to Canada than government-assisted refugees?
Yes, that is correct.
Right. So, when you hear liberal politicians and political advocacy groups speak broadly about, quote, refugees succeeding, do you think they may be conflating the two different groups and two different outcomes across these programs?
I don't think so, because even though the purpose.
The privately sponsored refugees do have higher short-term and long-term, according to research, economic contribution that lasts for well over a decade than the government-assisted refugee stream. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right.
And there is reason for that. Private government-assisted refugees are more likely to be vulnerable from the point of a family structure. And that has something to do with the introduction of ERPA in early 2000s. The government is emphasizing the acceptance of vulnerable
refugees. But does it have
refugees.
anything to do with things like initial selection factors, like language ability, education, age, or labor market conditions at all?
For the refugee, for the period where we studied the refugees who arrived in 2000 to 2014, those socio-demographic characteristics are not, and human capital characteristics were not taken into account. That is my understanding. Unlike the economic immigration program.
So, in your view, are asylum seekers more like government-assisted refugees, or are they more like private refugees, privately sponsored refugees?
I would say it is asylum seekers. Their characteristics are unknown in the sense that, unlike economic immigration policy program and the resettled refugee program, asylum seekers are not vetted by the government. So then, some asylum seekers can be very highly educated. Other asylum seekers may be not fluent in English or French at all. It is an unknown factor.
Would you agree that integration of refugees is not something that just happens automatically? Like, it requires housing, language training, employment supports, healthcare, schools, transportation, all things that put pressures on local communities?
For the refugees.
Yeah.
Yes, for the government-assisted refugees and privately sponsored refugees, their socioeconomic profiles are indeed weaker, less strong than economic refugees who are admitted into Canada based on their education, language skills, as well as their pre-arranged employment. So it is not surprising that the refugees' economic outcomes are less favorable than economic immigrants.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Monsieur Joseph, vous
Merci
avez
beaucoup,
5
Madame.
minutes.
5 minutes. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to begin, I would like to congratulate my colleague, Mr. Deschênes, who has been defending the businesses in his region. would challenge them to find asylum seekers with an open work permit so they can work at businesses in his region. For some time, we've been talking about immigration, but we are not talking about the fact that immigration is mostly concentrated on the first generation. But good news for Quebec, since the Minister of Immigration took her position, there has been a reduction in the asylum seeking requests for Quebec. One of the witnesses said asylum seekers are not people who leave their countries because of poverty. They are skilled workers. There are also francophones, 1/3 of them, and 1/3 of them hope to learn French. So here's my question. Don't you think there might be a fight between provinces? Let's say Quebec says, I don't want these asylum seekers. Let's send them to Alberta or elsewhere. If Ontario says, no, I don't want them. What are we going to do?
So, thank you, Madam Speaker. What are we going to do? There is a reason why many asylum seekers try to reach Quebec, especially Montreal, as well as Toronto. There is a history of immigration in those so-called traditional destinations. Traditional destinations where there is a lot of there is established co-ethnic, co-national communities, and also there is not just institutionalized resettled agencies, but also NGOs. Some NGOs specifically cater to asylum seekers, as one of the witnesses was commenting earlier.
But earlier, I was at McDonald's. I was talking to an athlete. Her parents arrived in Canada 24 years ago as asylum seekers. Earlier in the house, there were members clapping for athletes. And some of them even had tears in their eyes. So we're going to talk about immigration in another way, a different approach, because immigration is very important for Canada. It's precious. But let's take a legislative point of view. We have to understand that this can transform people's lives. We're talking about forced migration in some cases. Not long ago, in my own riding, I spoke to a family, asylum seekers with an open work permit. They're already living there. And I said, why did you choose Quebec? They said, well, it's not my fault if Quebecers are nice, if Quebecers speak French, and if it's the best province in the country. I said, you're right. He also said, because he follows what happens here in Ottawa. Do you think that there's a bit of a confusion when we talk about immigration?
Confusion about immigration.
That is time.
Unfortunately.
That is time. My apologies. We now move to Mr. Deschamps for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Des questions pour vous, Madame Morad?
Thank you, Chair. I have some questions for you, Ms. Morad. Was lucky enough to visit your offices in Montreal. I'd like to talk about the problem of funding. I know that you have private donations, but other centers are funded by the government of Quebec, especially to help permanent residents. So what happens for asylum seekers? How are their services funded for people who are in Quebec, for example?
Thank you very much for the question, Madam Chair. This is a very interesting question, and I think it speaks to the need for the adoption of a system that would open up funding that is applicable for organizations that do serve refugee claimants. This is a huge funding constraint, unfortunately, and as you did mention, there are organizations that are not able to commit manpower or hours to look for different funding alternatives. And so what happens is that collaboration between organizations does happen. So referrals to organizations such as ours that are able to provide services for asylum seekers do happen. And this does contribute to the stress that's put onto organizations that are able to serve refugee claimants.
Pour le bénéfice du comité, là, dites-nous, lorsque demandez...
For the benefit of the committee, can you tell us this? When an asylum seeker arrives, what services do we need to provide?
Absolutely. Here in Quebec, depending on where the asylum seeker is coming from, language supports and services are definitely necessary, as well as things like health and wellness, for example. There's psychosocial support that can be given to asylum seekers through community organizations, as well as integration and employment services. And these are all services that we do provide at the Refugee Center. When it comes to our employment services, we do support our refugee claimant clients with preparing for interviews and sort of assessing what their labor history has been, looking to alternative options here in Montreal.
Est-ce que vous êtes d'accord avec cette perception que j'ai entendue, en tout cas assez souvent, là, en
Do you agree with this opinion that I've heard often in Montreal that we don't have enough money to give services to all asylum seekers?
I do think that an adoption of a program that would allow organizations to better coordinate amongst ourselves, as well as having funding for organizations that do serve asylum seekers, would definitely address this. Thank you.
I just was looking at the clock, colleagues, and talked to the clerk, and we do have time for 5 and 5 to finish this round off. So I will turn the floor to Mr. Managakis, and then it will be Ms. Sodi on deck.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here with us today. I'm going to have some questions for you, Ms. Kobussen, if I may. Has the government ever reached out to your organization to discuss immigration concerns and how it would impact the businesses and your membership?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. No, they have not.
They have not. Would you say that the rapid unplanned increase in asylum claimants and all immigrants has put a strain on local business and services that your association members simply weren't prepared for?
I would say that immigration has definitely put a strain on many of the local services and local infrastructure that we need to support them. I think most significantly would be housing.
Housing. We heard that from a city councillor, from a Saskatoon city councillor that testified in the first segment of today's meeting. He also indicated that there's some strain on having to increase taxes in order to deal with some of the immigration issues that the municipality has had to deal with. What are you hearing from your members regarding escalating taxes at all levels of government?
Well, taxes are never a good thing. And, you know, it's interesting, too. We had some conversation earlier, and we heard earlier that provinces, municipalities, and the federal governments need to work together. But, you know, there's only one taxpayer. So regardless of where the money comes from, it's coming out of our business owners' pockets and our residents' pockets. And we need to be mindful of that.
Well, as a business person, immigration, you know, is an economic driver. I'm sure you would agree with that. But right now there's federal backlogs, and it really feels like the IRCC, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada's capacity in dealing with these open door policies that the Liberal government has had has sort of taken a priority over economic immigration. They're focusing on dealing with backlogs instead of focusing on economic immigration, which I would imagine would be supplying a resource very valuable to your membership. Could you comment on that?
Yes, thank you. Again, Madam Chair. Again, in Saskatchewan with the Saskatchewan Immigrant Nomination Program, the SINP program, we saw great success in managed, efficient, and effective immigration levels. We were bringing in entrepreneurs, and that was a complement to the federal system at the time. I want to say that was probably around between like 2012, 2018, somewhere in there. And when the federal limits increased, and Saskatchewan wasn't quite prepared for it. But essentially what they did, though, was the federal limits increased, but they put a cap on that program. So what we saw was immigrants coming in, but not in a managed and orderly way. And I think that the longer we have backlog, the longer that we have bottlenecks in the system, we're going to see challenges in our community and those pressures on the services that are required from immigrants that aren't processed thoroughly. So yes, I think that the federal government has created, exacerbated, and increased our problems in Saskatoon specifically.
Public confidence in Canada's immigration system among your members, and I guess the broader community in the city of Saskatoon, has eroded because of how the government has handled asylum claims and the immigration system in a bigger way?
Well, again, our community and the members I represent are there's a good portion of immigrant business owners and immigrant businesses in Saskatoon West. I think they're probably grateful for where they have landed, but I know that there's people that they're waiting for that maybe aren't so fortunate and don't have answers yet. I think that, we rely on a healthy, fulsome, and robust immigration system, but certainty is what is needed for these people so that they can be assured that who they're going to sponsor to come over or who they're going to hire. And I'm not talking about necessarily just the immigrant business owners. I'm also talking about the service organizations that require labor market opinions and labor market, programs that bring workers over, and not temporary workers, but permanent. So I just think certainty and efficiency equals effectiveness, and then we have a smart program, but that's not happening right now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And to bring it home is Ms. Sodi for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, and a warm welcome to all of our witnesses. Ms. Morad, welcome back to committee. I know that you were here with us earlier on in February as well. The last time you appeared at this committee, you discussed the acceptance rate of refugees in Canada and the low fraud rate in the system. Can you further expand on why Canada's programs specifically may have a higher approval rate than other countries, given program context and geography, and how organizations such as the Refugee Center work with claimants to integrate successfully into their new communities?
Thank you very much for that question, Madam Chair. The integration process is very, very key here. The services that we do provide are wraparound, as I mentioned. It's very important to have a holistic approach in order to set refugee claimants up for success in their integration process. As for the high approval rate, I, of course, don't have knowledge of the back-end system or what goes on behind closed doors. But I do think that our standard of refugee claimant or of immigrant is very, very high in general when we compare it to maybe other countries, for example. And so I do think that typically the individuals that are seeking to come to Canada are aware of the caliber that the government is after, and it really is a matter of ensuring that we can sort of harness that potential and use it to the benefit of Canadian society. And this would require some collaboration between all levels of government as well as with community organizations, because as I did mention, the settlement services and support, the wraparound support there is very key for success on all levels.
Your answer. Can you also provide this committee with any examples of success stories that you have seen at the Refugee Centre in terms of vulnerable individuals seeking refuge in Canada being able to settle, integrate, and contribute to our communities when supported by organizations such as yours?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that question. With our pilot program of relocation, which I'll bring up here because we are talking about redistribution, we have a few success stories, and I can share two with you. We had an individual who originally arrived to Vancouver, and he had to go through a credential recognition process as a teacher. And we were able to resettle him in an Indigenous reserve in Quebec. And now he teaches English to children on that reserve. And so I think that's a really important story to highlight here because it shows collaboration between Indigenous communities and newcomers, which is definitely something that should be focused on. We've also had a number of individuals who have laid down their roots here in Montreal, were able to find affordable housing for themselves, and have been able to secure work for themselves as well. These individuals don't just take a job and call it a day. They actually do give back to their society and their community as well. And we see a lot of these individuals that we have helped serve come back to our center and volunteer as well and sort of pay it forward.
Last but not least, we've got about a minute and a half left. I just want to give you some time to give the committee any recommendations that you might have in terms of how the federal government can support the successful integration of refugees through efficient processing methods. And I know that you had mentioned like a trilateral collaboration between the provinces, the federal government, and the municipalities. So if you'd like to elaborate on that, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. This program that I'm suggesting for the federal government would be collaborative in nature, as was mentioned, but not only with governments and municipalities as well as community organizations, but with labor recruitment agencies as well. What I'm imagining here is a program similar to the EMPP with a back end that allows refugee claimants to fill out a portal, a profile, so to speak, that would allow them to include their education and work experience, their skills and training, if they have family in Canada and where, as well as if they have a province of preference with justification. And on the other side, it would allow employers to do the same thing, who have open work opportunities, willingness to provide trainings if necessary, willingness to provide housing opportunities if necessary, and willingness to provide or assist with transportation options. And so here we would have an agent who can sort of compare these different profiles and matches and provide a ranked system in which the claimant can select what is best for them and relocate. And here it's really important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is time. And I would like to thank all of the witnesses for their time, for their testimony, as well as answering questions, and thank colleagues as well. So our next meeting is on Monday the 1st, and the notice of that meeting has been published. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting for the day? Yes. Adjourned.